I simulated the entire 2023 Formula 1 season with all updated driver transfers and 2023 modded cars and performance as well to see who will come out on top next year. My name is Chris, welcome back to CF Racing and enjoy the video. This video is sponsored by Manscaped. Manscaped is my go-to below-the-waist trimmer, and they've recently released the Lawnmower 4.0. It contains the newest skin-safe technology for those special areas. The Lawnmower 4.0 also comes with an LED light for more precise trimming, different guard lengths, and it is waterproof. Use code CFRACE for 20% off your purchase plus free shipping. Thank you, Manscaped, for sponsoring today's video. Hey everybody, what's going on? Chris here, otherwise known as CF Racing, and today, everybody, we are doing a 2023 season simulation. But disclaimer, just before this video starts, I am going to be using the 2022 game for this, so there aren't going to be tracks like Qatar, there aren't going to be tracks like Las Vegas in the game. So we're just going to basically be using the entire 2022 calendar to do this 2023 season pretty much. So sorry, it's not completely official, but it's really the best I can do. Also, want to give a huge shout out to all the mod creators who created the livery mods for this video, and especially the mod creator who created this mod called the Cheat Tool mod, which is not a mod that you install in the Formula 1 game. It's sort of like an excess application that you can just download on your computer, and pretty much you can connect to the F1 game and literally transfer drivers and their stats in the game, which I didn't even know existed, which is awesome. So huge shout out to that guy, and huge shout out to the Ammo Mods Discord for helping me set that up. Really appreciate that. Also, if you guys are new here and you enjoy simulation content sort of like this from me, then go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends, join the Discord. Link is in the description. I mean, there's a lot of cool people in the Discord. Go join that, it's really awesome. And last but not least, if you guys want to send a super thanks in the comment section for today's video, I'll definitely give you a shout out in the next video and responding to your super thanks. And once again, thanks all channel memberships. If you want to become a member, just hit that join button. Super cheap, super easy. And with that being said, let's take a look at the 2023 liveries. The first livery here is for Mercedes, and I found this really beautiful 2023 black silver fade Mercedes, and if they do this next year, it could be one of the nicest liveries on the grid. Next up, we have Red Bull. Basically, the livery is exactly the same, except for winning both Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. They decided to make the yellow on the Red Bull a very shiny gold. Next up, we have a very beautiful Ferrari livery, in my opinion. I love the red, white, and green stripe that represents Italy. Reminds me of the 2018 Ferrari, and the white reminds me of those old Ferraris from like 2010, 2012 of those Fernando days. Beautiful livery. Thank you, mod creator. Next up, we have basically the exact same McLaren livery as this year, except it's a lot more Gulf colors instead of sort of more other color than what it is right now. And I really like this livery. I think it's beautiful, and if McLaren did this next year, it would be like cherry on top. After this, we have black and blue Alpine. Once again, a very good looking livery. I believe BWT is gone in this, and you'll see a little bit later where it goes, but this is a beautiful livery. Would have liked to see a little bit more red, but I think it's still gorgeous. After that, this is probably the biggest change out of all of the liveries, and there really wasn't any good 2023 AlphaTauri liveries on race department, so I decided to go with this random Japanese one because Yuki Tsunoda is going to be their team leader next year, or maybe Nick DeVries, who really knows. But hey, I think this one looks awesome, so let's hope AlphaTauri does. Next up, we have AMR Aston Martin Racing taking over, and they don't have many sponsors, but you got the 007 on there. I believe there was a slight mod glitch on the side pod that sticks out. There is supposed to be the Aston Martin wing. It's in the game, but it's not in this little picture here. I don't really know what happened. I think it was some sort of glitch, but it's supposed to be there. It looks a lot better with that little wing. After this, we have BWT joining Williams to be one of their title sponsors, and I can really see BWT joining Williams, and if they do this, their livery will certainly look fantastic next year. Alfa Romeo has one of the best liveries of all time, in my opinion, so I really don't think there's any need to change, so I did not change a single thing because this is one of my favorite liveries ever. Haas, now that they are basically full American with 2 non-American drivers, have gone the full McDonald's look with McDonald's as a title sponsor, and this is the 2023 beautiful McDonald's Haas. Heading into 2023, there weren't many regulation changes, but it looks like Mercedes is actually the fastest car in the grid, followed by Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Alpine, Haas, Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, AlphaTauri, and no surprise, Williams is in dead last. It really looks like there is a big separation from the top 5 teams to the bottom 5 teams, as it's really Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Alpine. They're pretty high up there. I mean, it's really top 3, then there's like a next level of McLaren, Alpine, but then Haas to Williams all the way at the back of the grid is very, very close. So it'll be fun to see how many points each team can really score this year. George Russell takes race 1 in Bahrain, followed by Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton on the podium. And from 4th to 10th, we have Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Esteban Ocon, Fernando Alonso, and the fastest lap point goes to George Russell. Race 2 in Saudi Arabia was also won by George Russell, followed by Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton on the podium. Max Verstappen, Pierre Gasly, Lando Norris, Sergio Perez, Oscar Piastri scoring his first points, Nico Hülkenberg, and Fernando Alonso round out your top 10, with Max Verstappen getting the extra point for fastest lap. Race 3 in Australia was also won by George Russell, as he has a near perfect start to the season, followed by Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton on the podium, followed by Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, Nico Hülkenberg, and Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10, and the fastest lap point goes to George Russell for another pretty much almost perfect weekend. And so far, Haas has actually had quite a few points finishes. Great job for them. The Imola sprint race was won by Lewis Hamilton, followed by Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, and last to get points is Carlos Sainz. The Imola race was the first race of the year not won by a Mercedes driver, and that crown goes to Max Verstappen, followed by Lewis Hamilton and George Russell rounding out the podium, followed by Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Esteban Ocon, Alexander Albon, and the fastest lap point goes to Lando Norris. Race 5 in Miami was also won by Max Verstappen, followed by Sergio Perez and George Russell rounding out the top 3, followed by Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri getting more points, and the fastest lap point goes to Max Verstappen. Race 6 in Spain was won by Max Verstappen, followed by George Russell and Sergio Perez rounding out the podium. From 4 to 10, we have Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, Lando Norris, Kevin Magnussen, and the fastest lap point goes to Max Verstappen. Race 7 in Monaco was the first win of the year for Ferrari, and that win goes to Carlos Sainz, followed by George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. And from 4 to 10, we have Charles Leclerc, who has a lot of 4th place finishes this year, Pierre Gasly, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon, and Kevin Magnussen, with the fastest lap point going to George Russell. Race 8 in Baku was won by Max Verstappen, followed by Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc, with Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Esteban Ocon, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and Nick De Vries and Williams scoring his first points, and with Sergio Perez getting the points for the fastest lap. Race 9 in Canada has a Mercedes driver back on top, with George Russell winning, I believe, his 4th race of the year, followed by Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton rounding out the podium. From 4 to 10, we have Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, and Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10, with Kevin Magnussen getting point for the fastest lap. Race 10 in Silverstone is a repeat winner in Silverstone, as Carlos Sainz wins there again, just like he did in 2022, followed by Max Verstappen and George Russell, with Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Nico Hülkenberg, Esteban Ocon, and George Russell gets the point for the fastest lap. And now the race right before the midpoint of the season in Austria. The sprint race was won once again, actually, by Lewis Hamilton. He's got 2 wins, and they come in the sprint race this year, so they're not really wins. Followed by Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, and Oscar Piastri. And race 11 in Austria was won by Max Verstappen, followed by Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton rounding out your podium, with George Russell, Lando Norris, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, Oscar Piastri, and Esteban Ocon rounding out the top 10, with Charles Leclerc getting the point for the fastest lap. At the midway point of the season, we can really see how many cars have done upgrades throughout the year, and at the midway point, Ferrari now actually has the best car in the grid heading in just at the end of the Austria race weekend, with Mercedes in P2, Red Bull P3, and it looks like McLaren is in a clear P4. Then it is very close between Alfa Romeo, Alpine, and Haas, actually. Surprisingly, they are all very close, which is really cool to see. Then there is a sort of drop-off between AlphaTauri, Williams, and Aston Martin, as they are basically the back markers. It's good to see Alfa Romeo doing a lot of upgrades. Same with Ferrari. They've had some big upgrades all the way from Canada to Austria, which is really cool. Yeah, and even Williams, they look like they're doing pretty good. Seems like the grid is closed up quite a bit. Once again, it is still not the most competitive grid from 1 to 10, but either way, it is still pretty interesting. So let's take a look at the second half of the year. Race 12 in France was won by Carlos Sainz, followed by George Russell and Charles Leclerc rounding out the podium, followed by Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Oscar Piastri, Esteban Ocon, and Kevin Magnussen round out your top 10. There was no fastest lap point because the driver who got fastest lap did not finish in the top 10. Race 13 in Hungary was won by George Russell, and let's count it, that's his 5th win of the year, followed by Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton in P3, with Max Verstappen, Pierre Gasly, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Esteban Ocon, and Zhou Guanyu rounding out the top 10, with Charles Leclerc getting the point for the fastest lap. Race 14 in Spa was Charles Leclerc's, surprisingly, his 1st win of the year, followed by Sergio Perez and Lewis Hamilton rounding out the podium. Man, that is a great podium. Pierre Gasly finishes in 4th, followed by Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, Esteban Ocon, George Russell, Yuki Tsunoda, who I believe that's his 1st points of the year, Alexander Albon, who I believe that's his 1st points of the year, and the fastest point goes to Charles Leclerc as he maxes out this Spa weekend. Race 15 in the Netherlands was won by the home hero, Max Verstappen, as he takes P1, followed by Carlos Sainz P2 and Charles Leclerc P3. Lewis Hamilton finishes in P4, followed by George Russell, Sergio Perez, Pierre Gasly, Zhou Guanyu, Oscar Piastri, Valtteri Bottas, and the fastest lap point goes to Carlos Sainz. Race 16 in Monza was also won by Max Verstappen, followed by Charles Leclerc in P2, and Carlos Sainz rounding out the podium in P3. Sergio Perez finishes P4, followed by George Russell, Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly, Nico Hülkenberg, Kevin Magnussen, and the fastest lap point goes to Max Verstappen. Race 17 in Singapore is Charles Leclerc's 2nd win of the year, followed by Max Verstappen in P2 and Lewis Hamilton in P3. That is such a good podium. George Russell finishes in P4, followed by Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, Sergio Perez, Esteban Ocon, Alexander Albon, and Leclerc maxes out the weekend once again with fastest lap. Race 18 in Japan was also won by Charles Leclerc. That's his 3rd win on the year, followed by George Russell and the first non-Red Bull, Mercedes, or Ferrari driver to get on the podium. Pierre Gasly finishes P3 in that Alpine. Good to see him up there. Carlos Sainz finishes in P4, followed by Esteban Ocon, Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, Kevin Magnussen, and Gasly gets the points for fastest lap for a beautiful 16-point weekend for Alpine there. Charles Leclerc wins his 3rd race in the row and 4th of the year as he wins in Circuit of the Americas, followed by Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen in P2. Lando Norris finishes P4, followed by Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Sergio Perez, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, and Fernando Alonso in that boat of an Aston Martin finishes in P10, with Max Verstappen getting the point for the fastest lap. Max Verstappen wins in race 20 in Mexico for like the 5th year in a row. He just keeps winning there, followed by by Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez rounding out the podium. Charles Leclerc finishes P4, followed by George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Nico Hülkenberg, Esteban Ocon, Kevin Magnussen, and Max Verstappen scores the point for the fastest lap. Race 21, this is the sprint race in Brazil, was won by Charles Leclerc, followed by Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, George Russell, Pierre Gasly, Lando Norris, and Esteban Ocon. Remember, sprint race points go from 8 for first place all the way down to 1 for 8th place. The full race in Brazil was won by Max Verstappen, followed by Carlos Sainz in P2 and Charles Leclerc in P3. Sergio Perez was in P4, followed by Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Esteban Ocon, and Oscar Piastri round out the top 10, with Max Verstappen getting the point for the fastest lap. And now we are in the final race of the year here in Abu Dhabi. Charles Leclerc claims his 5th win of the year, followed by George Russell in P2 and Max Verstappen in P3, followed by Sergio Perez P4, Carlos Sainz P5, Pierre Gasly P6, Lewis Hamilton P7, Yuki Tsunoda, Lando Norris, and Nico Hülkenberg round out the top 10, with George Russell getting the points for the fastest lap. And at the end of the season, this is what the overall competitive race order looks like. It is very close between Red Bull and Ferrari for the best car at the end of the year, but apparently on the graph, Red Bull is on top, followed by Ferrari P2, Mercedes is in a clear P3, then we have a big gaggle of cars between Alpine, McLaren, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Haas. All 5 of those teams are very close for basically P4. Then at the bottom is Aston Martin and Williams just dangling around back there. It's not looking very good for both of them, but hey, Alonso still scored a lot of points. So now guys, what I want you guys to do is to go in the comment section down below. Let me know who you think won the drivers and constructor standings after all you saw right now. And let's see if you guys got it right. Let's see, maybe I'll pin the first one to comment it. We'll see. At the end of the season, this is what your constructors standings looks like, and it is actually very close at the top, with Red Bull taking their constructors championship with 653 points, followed by Ferrari with 638, 1 point ahead of Mercedes, 637. In P4 we have Alpine with 199, McLaren has 179, then there is a major drop off with Haas with 22, AlphaTauri with 7, Aston Martin with 7, Alfa Romeo was 6, and Williams scored 3. It's really cool to see that even in the second year of this regulation change, that every team is still scoring points, which is something that, you know, doesn't happen very often. We know that Haas didn't score points in 2021. The Williams really didn't score any points, I believe, in 2020. They were not very good. So yeah, it's really cool to see all these teams scoring points. And at the end of the season, only one can come out on top, and that one is Max Verstappen. So that means in this simulation, Max Verstappen wins his 3rd title in a row and becomes a 3-time world champion, with George Russell surprisingly in P2 and Charles Leclerc in P3. Great season for all those guys there. Carlos Sainz finishes in 4th, with Hamilton in 5th, Sergio Perez in 6th, Lando Norris in 7th, once again, best of the rest, Pierre Gasly in 8th, Esteban Ocon in 9th, and Pierre Gasly absolutely dominated Ocon this year. So let's see, I don't know how Ocon fans are going to take that one. And in his first season, Oscar Piastri finishes in P10. Granted, only 17 points, but he was still P10. Nico Hülkenberg, in his return to Formula 1, ends up beating Kevin Magnussen, which, I mean, 13 points to 9 is not a lot, but in that car, I guess it is quite a lot. Fernando Alonso scores 7 points in that dog of an Aston Martin, once again is showing how good of a driver he is, with Yuki Tsunoda in 14th. Zhou Guanyu outscores Bottas by 3 points. He had 4, Bottas had 1. Albon had 3 points in 16th, Bottas had 1 in 17th, De Vries had 1 in 18th, Lance Stroll and Logan Sargent finished P19 and P20, and both score 0 points. So guys, that is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you guys did enjoy and you want to see more simulations like this, then hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends, join the Discord, links in the description. Also, once again, thank you all channel members, and if you want to become a member, hit that join button and send a super thanks in the comment section down below for a shout out in the next video. And once again, big shout out to all the mod creators. Thanks for making such great mods. And with that being said, see you guys next time. Goodbye.